After 23 years of marriage, a wife convinced her husband to agree to an open marriage to get more freedom. She embarks on several affairs. Instant regret just after her husband sent her divorce papers. Chrystel sat at the dining table, her fingers tracing the patterns on the tablecloth, lost in a storm of thoughts. The house was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, a sound that seemed to echo her growing restlessness. She and Jan had built a life together filled with comfort and stability, yet now, after 23 years, she found herself yearning for something more, something undefined. Jan entered the room, his presence as familiar as the furniture that adorned their home. He smiled at her, a warm, loving smile that had once made her heart flutter. Now, it only deepened the chasm of her inner conflict. "Is everything okay, Chrystel?" Jan asked, sensing her unease. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a tumult of emotions. "Jan, we need to talk," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Jan's expression shifted to concern as he sat down beside her. "What's on your mind?" Chrystel took a deep breath, gathering the courage to voice her thoughts. "I've been feeling confined lately. Our life, it's become so predictable, so routine. I love you, but I need more freedom." Jan's brow furrowed, a sense of dread creeping into his heart. "Freedom? What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about us, about our marriage. What if we considered an open marriage?" The words, once spoken, seemed to hang heavily in the air. Jan recoiled as if struck. The concept was alien to him, a stark contrast to his beliefs about marriage and commitment. Open marriage? Chrystel, where is this coming from? "I don't know, Jan. I just feel like I'm missing out on something, like there's a part of me that's still unexplored. I don't want to lose you, but I also don't want to lose myself," she explained, her voice laced with desperation. Jan sat in stunned silence. The idea of sharing Chrystel with others was inconceivable. He had always viewed their marriage as a sacred bond, exclusive and unwavering. Yet, the fear of losing her completely was even more terrifying. "Chrystel, I don't know if I can do that," he admitted, his voice strained. "Our marriage, it means everything to me. The thought of you with someone else, it's unbearable." Chrystel reached for his hand, seeking to bridge the growing gap between them. "I understand how hard this is, Jan. But I feel trapped. I need to explore these feelings, or I fear they'll consume me. Can't we try? For the sake of our marriage?" Jan looked into her eyes, searching for the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had built his life around. The idea of an open marriage clashed with every fiber of his being, yet the thought of losing Chrystel was even more agonizing. After a long, heart-wrenching silence, Jan nodded slowly, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. "Okay, Chrystel. We'll try it your way. But I'm not sure how I'll cope." Chrystel squeezed his hand, a mix of relief and guilt swirling within her. She had stepped onto a path unknown, driven by a desire for freedom, unaware of the cost that lay ahead. As they sat there, the unspoken void between them grew wider, a silent harbinger of the turmoil that was to come. The decision to embrace an open marriage had been made, but the reality of it settled uneasily on Chrystel. She found herself on a path she had longed for, yet the journey was more daunting than she had anticipated. Jan, trying to mask his discomfort, had retreated into a quiet acceptance, his once vibrant demeanor now subdued. Chrystel's first steps into this new world were tentative. She met new people, experiencing a thrill that had been missing in her life. Each encounter was a mixture of excitement and guilt, a cocktail of emotions that left her both exhilarated and drained. Meanwhile, Jan, unable to voice his growing despair, threw himself into his work. The long hours at the office became his refuge, a place where he could escape the reality of his wife's explorations. In the evenings, he took up painting, a hobby he had abandoned years ago, finding solace in the strokes of his brush. As Chrystel navigated through her new experiences, she couldn't help but notice the growing distance between her and Jan. The conversations that once flowed easily were now strained, filled with unspoken words and hidden feelings. The laughter that had once filled their home was replaced by a stifling silence. Despite the freedom she had yearned for, Chrystel found herself grappling with a sense of emptiness. The connections she made were fleeting, lacking the depth and comfort she shared with Jan. With each new encounter, she was reminded of what she was risking, of the love and companionship that had been a constant in her life. Jan, on his part, struggled to cope with the new dynamics of their marriage. He missed the intimacy and trust they once shared. The sight of Chrystel getting ready for another evening out was a dagger to his heart. He longed to express his feelings, to tell her how much he missed her, how much he wanted things to go back to the way they were. But fear of pushing her further away kept him silent. As the weeks turned into months, the chasm between them widened. Chrystel's adventures, once a source of curiosity and excitement, began to lose their allure. The realization that she was jeopardizing the most meaningful relationship in her life started to dawn on her. One evening, as Chrystel returned home from another unfulfilling encounter, she found Jan in his studio, lost in his painting. She watched him for a moment, admiring the intensity and passion with which he worked. It was a side of him she hadn't seen in a long time, a side she suddenly missed. "Jan," she began tentatively, her voice barely a whisper. He turned, his expression one of surprise and guarded hope. "Yes, Chrystel." She took a step closer, her heart heavy with words she struggled to find. "I've been thinking, about us, about everything. I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing anymore." Jan put down his brush, his eyes searching hers. "I've been thinking too," he admitted. "I miss us, Chrystel. I miss what we had." Tears welled up in Chrystel's eyes as the magnitude of her actions hit her. She had sought freedom, but at what cost? The man she loved, the life they had built together, was slipping away, and the journey she had embarked on suddenly felt lonely and misguided. As they stood there, a fragile hope flickering between them, the daunting task of bridging the gap they had created loomed ahead. But for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the love that still lingered in the unspoken void. The shift in their relationship was subtle yet undeniable. Chrystel's journey into her newfound freedom continued, but the initial thrill had begun to wane, replaced by a creeping sense of emptiness. Jan, on the other hand, found himself in a state of constant internal conflict, torn between his love for Chrystel and his inability to accept the new terms of their marriage. Chrystel's encounters, once a source of exhilaration, now left her feeling increasingly hollow. The conversations and connections with others paled in comparison to the depth and history she shared with Jan. She began to question her pursuit of freedom, wondering if the price she was paying was too high. Jan's world, too, had grown darker. He watched Chrystel's continued explorations with a heavy heart. The trust and intimacy that had been the foundation of their marriage seemed to crumble a little more with each passing day. His art, once a refuge, could no longer shield him from the pain of his reality. One rainy evening, as Chrystel prepared for another night out, Jan's feelings boiled over. "Chrystel, do you have to go?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of desperation and resignation. Chrystel paused, taken aback by the raw emotion in Jan's voice. I thought you were okay with this," she replied, her own voice faltering. "I thought I could be," Jan admitted, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "But it's tearing me apart, Chrystel. I can't stand the thought of you with someone else. I miss you, even when you're right here." Crystal's heart ached at his words. She saw the man she loved, vulnerable and hurt, a stark contrast to the strong, composed Jan she had always known. She realized how much her quest for freedom had cost them both. The evening out lost its appeal. She cancelled her plans and sat down with Jan, opening up about her own doubts and fears. For the first time in months, they talked openly, sharing their feelings and the pain they had both been harboring. As they talked, Chrystel saw glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with, the man she had built a life with. She remembered the laughter, the shared dreams, the comfort of their togetherness. The realization that she was risking it all for fleeting moments of excitement shook her to the core. Jan, too, found a measure of relief in their conversation. Expressing his pain and hearing Chrystel's doubts brought a sense of validation to his feelings. He understood her need for exploration, but he couldn't suppress his longing for the way things used to be. In the days that followed, a new dynamic began to emerge between them. The distance that had grown was now acknowledged, and in its acknowledgement, there was a chance for healing. Chrystel began to scale back her outings, increasingly aware of the cost of her freedom. However, the damage that had been done was not easily repaired. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. The shadow of Chrystel's actions loomed large, casting doubts on their future. Jan's pain, though slightly eased, still lingered, a reminder of the wounds that had been inflicted. As they navigated this new phase of their relationship, the uncertainty of their future hung in the balance. The path to reconciliation was unclear, but for the first time, there was a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they could find their way back to each other. The weeks following their heartfelt conversation saw Chrystel and Jan attempting to navigate the turbulent waters of their strained relationship. Chrystel, recognizing the depth of her husband's pain, had curtailed her explorations, but the shadow of her past actions loomed large in their home. Jan, though appreciative of her efforts, found himself wrestling with a lingering sense of betrayal. As autumn gave way to winter, the cold winds seemed to mirror the chill in their relationship. The couple, once inseparable, now coexisted in a state of uneasy truce. Conversations were polite but superficial, each avoiding the raw topics that lay just beneath the surface. Jan's pain had not subsided as he had hoped. Instead, it festered, a constant reminder of the chasm that had formed between them. The sight of Chrystel, once a source of joy, now evoked a complex mix of love and hurt. He found himself retreating further into his work and his art, using them as shields against his emotions. Chrystel, aware of the growing distance, felt a mounting sense of desperation. She longed to bridge the gap, to return to the closeness they once shared, but she was at a loss for how to mend the fractures in their marriage. The freedom she had sought now felt hollow, a poor substitute for the love and companionship she had jeopardized. The turning point came unexpectedly. Jan, after a particularly long and introspective night in his studio, made a decision that would change the course of their lives. He realized that he could no longer live in the shadow of Chrystel's actions, that the trust they once shared was irreparably damaged. With a heavy heart, he drafted divorce papers, a tangible manifestation of his inner turmoil. He left them on the kitchen table one morning, a silent yet deafening statement of his pain and decision. Chrystel found the papers later that day. The sight of them struck her like a physical blow. The reality of losing Jan, the prospect of their marriage ending, was a wake-up call like no other. She had never imagined her quest for freedom would lead to this, the dissolution of the very foundation of her life. In a frenzy of emotions, Chrystel confronted Jan. "How could you?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I thought we were trying to work things out." Jan, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears, replied with a voice tinged with sorrow and resignation. "I've tried, Chrystel, but the pain is too much. I can't live like this, always wondering, always hurting. I need to find peace, even if it means being apart." The conversation that followed was heart-wrenching. Chrystel pleaded, promised change, but Jan's decision was firm. He needed to heal, to find himself again, away from the shadow of doubt and betrayal. In the days that followed, their home became a place of mourning, mourning for lost love, for broken trust, and for the life they once shared. Chrystel was consumed with regret, realizing too late the true value of what she had risked in her pursuit of freedom. Jan, though resolute in his decision, grappled with a sense of loss. Letting go of Chrystel, of their shared history, was the hardest thing he had ever done. But he believed it was necessary, a step towards healing the wounds that had been inflicted. As the chapter of their marriage drew to a close, both Chrystel and Jan faced an uncertain future. The path ahead was unclear, filled with the daunting task of rebuilding their lives separately, each grappling with the fallout of decisions made and paths taken. In the aftermath of Jan's irrevocable decision, the house they had shared for over 2 decades felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Chrystel moved through its rooms like a ghost, haunted by memories and stifled by regrets. The finality of the divorce papers had shattered her world, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a life she barely recognized. Jan, meanwhile, was a silhouette of his former self. His decision to end the marriage, though necessary for his peace, weighed heavily on him. He had started to pack his belongings, each item a reminder of the life they had once so lovingly built together. The process was cathartic, but it was also a journey through a gauntlet of emotions. Chrystel spent her days in a haze of reflection. The freedom she had so desperately sought now tasted bitter. She realized how blinded she had been by her own desires, failing to see the treasure she had in Jan and their marriage. The irony of her situation was not lost on her. In seeking to find herself, she had lost the most important part of her life. As the reality of her impending divorce sank in, Chrystel began to confront the deeper issues that had led her down this path. She sought counseling, a step towards understanding her actions and healing the wounds she had inflicted on herself and Jan. Through this introspective journey, she began to grasp the complexities of her own heart, the unaddressed needs and fears that had driven her. Jan, on the other hand, found solace in his art, his canvas a witness to the turmoil within him. Each brushstroke was a step towards healing, a way to express the emotions he couldn't put into words. He also started to reconnect with old friends, slowly rebuilding the social life he had neglected during the turmoil of their marital strife. As the day of their final divorce hearing approached, both Chrystel and Jan grappled with a myriad of emotions. There was sorrow for what was lost, guilt for what had been done, and a faint glimmer of hope for what the future might hold. In the courtroom, the finality of their divorce became a stark reality. As they stood before the judge, a respectful distance between them, they shared a poignant glance, a silent acknowledgement of their shared history, the love that had once bound them, and the sorrow of its ending. After the proceedings, Chrystel approached Jan. "I am so sorry, Jan. For everything," she said, her voice a whisper of remorse. Jan looked at her, his eyes reflecting a complex mix of emotions. "I know, Chrystel. I wish things could have been different. Take care of yourself." With those final words, they parted ways, stepping into their new lives apart. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and opportunities for growth and self-discovery. Chrystel, emerging from the courthouse, felt a sense of closure. The pain and regret would always be a part of her, but she also felt a burgeoning strength. She had learned a painful lesson about love, freedom, and the consequences of her choices. Now, it was time to rebuild, to forge a new path grounded in the wisdom gained from her shattered reflections. And so, they both walked away, their paths diverging, each carrying the lessons of their past as they stepped into the unknown future.